Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Tuesday, September 16, 2025, the committee is meeting to resume its consideration of the nexus between national defense, national security, and taking place in hybrid format pursuant to standing orders and using the Zoom application. Continue, I ask participants to consult the guidelines on the table. These measures are to help prevent audio and feedback incidences and to protect the health and safety of our interpreters. I'd like to remind the witnesses and members to please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. And if you wish to speak, please raise your hand. And for members on Zoom, please use the hand raise function. The clerk and I will manage a speaking order as best we can. And for interpretation, use your earpiece and select the appropriate channel for either the floor, English, or French. That's also available on Zoom. Again, all comments should be addressed through the chair. And I'd now like to welcome our witnesses. I'm going to start with you, Nadia, because I'm going to not do your name justice. I have a tendency of doing that in this committee, and I do apologize from the outset, but it's Nadia Mikachuk. Is that correct?
Mikachuk.
Fantastic. You're the Executive Director of Goodman School of Mines at Laurentian University. Welcome. We have Heather Exner-Pito, the Director of Energy, Natural Resources and Environment for Macdonald Laurier Institute. And Sean Boyd is the Chair of the Board of Agnico Eagle Mines Limited. Thank you and welcome the three of you to be available to us via the virtual system. And with us here live, we have Mr. Jim Balzilli, founder of the Center for International Governance Innovation, and Rodrigue Turgeon. Is that correct? Thank you. National Program Co-Lead for Mining Watch Canada. So I'm going to proceed now to give all of you 5 minutes to do your opening statements. That'll take a good half hour of our time. So if we'll stick to that timeline, we'll get through it quickly. I know the members around would like to ask questions and have dialogue and interaction with all of you. So Nadia, I will proceed with you first, if I may.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Bonjour, Annie. Good morning to everyone. And to the members of the committee for this opportunity to appear today. As the chair said, I'm Dr. Nadia Mikachuk, Executive Director of the Goodman School of Mines at Laurentian University. I'm also President and CEO of Morocco Mining Innovation, and I also hold an NOHFC Industrial Research Chair in Biomining and Bioremediation. I'm based in Sudbury, Ontario, one of Canada's historic mining regions and a global center of mining innovation. My remarks today focus on the relationship between critical minerals, research capacity, and Canada's long-term defense sovereignty. I'd like to start with one point. Canada's defense sovereignty is inseparable from its mineral sovereignty. Modern defense systems are fundamentally materials dependent. Advanced communication systems, aerospace, sensors, autonomous systems, and electrified military infrastructure all rely on secure access to critical minerals such as nickel, copper, cobalt, and rare earth elements. Canada is very fortunate to possess significant mineral resources. However, the real strategic vulnerability today is not our geology. It is our processing capacity and supply chain dependence. In many cases, Canadian minerals are exported for refining and upgrading abroad before returning as inputs into advanced technologies. This reliance on foreign-controlled processing exposes Canada and our allies to supply disruption, export controls, and geopolitical pressure. Canada's defense industrial strategy recognizes that securing supply chains are key for inputs of critical minerals and essential to operational readiness and sovereignty. Put simply, geology alone does not provide security. Domestic processing capability and innovative, integrated supply chains do. One of the most immediate opportunities to strengthen the capability lies in Canada's legacy mine wastes. Across the country, more than 10,000 historic mine waste and tailings deposits contain recoverable concentrations of nickel, copper, cobalt, rare earth elements, and others. These deposits represent significant elemental reserves. In Sudbury alone, for example, legacy tailings are estimated to contain $8 to $10 billion worth of nickel, similarly for copper and cobalt. Mine waste valorization offers several strategic advantages. First, it can provide near-term domestic sources of critical minerals. Secondly, these projects should have shorter permitting timelines and lower capital costs compared to new greenfield mines. Third, when paired with emerging technologies such as biomining or other low energy recovery methods, they can reduce energy intensity while also advancing environmental remediation and reduce long-term impacts. From a national security perspective, mine waste should therefore be reframed as a latent strategic mineral reserve available for near-term development. Canada has begun recognizing this opportunity through initiatives such as Natural Resource Canada's Mining Value from Waste program. However, to fully realize this potential, we need to accelerate the National Tailings Database, resource evaluation, processing technologies, and domestic mineral upgrading capacity. This brings me to the role of research in universities. Recovering minerals from tailings is not straightforward. These materials do not behave like primary ore bodies. Each deposit requires tailored processing approaches and piloting scale-up. This is where Canada's research ecosystem becomes critical. Canada has a strong and growing capability in metallurgy, mineral characterization, AI applied to process optimization, technologies such as biomining, and cold region mining systems. These areas intersect directly with defense priorities related to supply chain resilience, advanced materials, and energy security. Universities and colleges, of course, are foundational to this capability. We conduct the discovery research that underpins new mineral recovery technologies. We train the engineers, metallurgists, material scientists, and skilled trades required for sovereign capability. We operate these piloting facilities like those that I've built at Laurentian, at Morocco, and Sudbury that can help move technologies from a lab discovery to industrial deployment. A strong defense industrial base is therefore built not only on factories and laboratories and piloting facilities, but also classrooms. At Laurentian University, for example, we recently launched the Minerals and Mining Strategy, designed to strengthen our role as Canada's mining university during a period of geopolitical change and rising demand for critical minerals. Many of the initiatives that we've outlined in that strategy, from mineral processing to advanced materials and automation and battery technologies, align specifically with emerging defense priorities. In closing, I would humbly like to offer 6 recommendations for consideration. First, to recognize mineral processing and recovery as sovereign defense capabilities. Secondly, to treat mine waste valorization as a strategic reserve strategy. Thirdly, to embed mineral and materials expertise within defense research advisory structures. 4, to invest in secure university and applied research infrastructure supporting defense relevant mineral innovation. 5th, align critical minerals workforce development with the Canada Defence Skills Agenda. And 6th, to ensure Canadian intellectual property arising from mineral innovation is protected within procurement and commercialization frameworks. Canada has the mineral endowment, the research capacity, the industrial expertise and strengths, and of course to strengthen allied critical mineral supply chains. The opportunity now is to connect those strengths into a coherent strategy that supports economic prosperity, environmental sustainability, and national security. With that, I close my statements. Thank you.
Thank you, Nadia Michichuk. I appreciate that. I'm going to alternate between virtual and those here live. So I'm going to go now to Monsieur Rodrigue Turgeon. If you can have up to 5 minutes, please.
Monsieur le Président du Comité,
Mr. Chair of the Committee and member for Mississauga Lakeshore, Vice Chairs of the Committee, members of the Committee, Mr. Clerk and members of your team, good morning. Thank you for having me. My name is Rodrigue Turgeon. I'm a lawyer and spokesperson and co-lead for the National Program of Mining Watch Canada. Founded in 1999, Mining Watch Canada now has 25 member organizations representing collectively several 100,000 people across the country. Its work has to do with human rights, environmental rights, Indigenous persons' rights, transparency, and accountability in the Canadian mining sector here in Canada and abroad. For 27 years, our mission has been involved in all these areas, whether it has to do with public policy or communities. As international institutions erode and middle powers like Canada find themselves on the front lines between 3 major powers, United States, Russia, and China, calls are growing for Canada to exercise greater control over its mineral resources to protect national security. And these concerns raise the idea that these foreign states could exploit Canada's critical minerals for economic, industrial, and military purposes in a way that threatens the security and sovereignty of the country. The strategies of the Government of Canada and the provinces on critical minerals all share the same common thread of defining these minerals in terms of their economic importance. And contrary to what industry and governments have been trying to convince the public, it is not at all necessary that these minerals be used for the energy transition. However, despite these security threats, which have been raised for several years, we see virtually nothing in recent bills introduced and passed into law across the country that would give authorities greater leverage over access and control of mineral resources. For the moment, we observe the governments seem more concerned about deterring foreign investors or erecting trade barriers than they are about seeing foreign states turn minerals extracted from Canadian soil against them. Paradoxically, we are even seeing a very high level of collaboration between the Government of Canada and the United States, including the Department of War, in the joint development of numerous mining projects in the country that are considered to be critical or of national importance. And we are seeing a diplomatic rapprochement between the Government of Canada and China. For the sake of consistency, the Government of Canada should adopt a more transparent approach and clearly communicate to the public whether it intends to tolerate, accept, or refuse foreign state access and control over Canada's critical minerals within global supply chains. It should then act with respect to this position in order to prevent access to these resources for foreign entities hostile to Canada's security. At the very least, the Canadian government should not allow for the fast tracking of permits for these foreign entities which are hostile. Under no circumstances should the country's minerals be used for the creation or proliferation of weapons used in violation of international law, including in genocide, whether employed by the country or by a third state. One thing is certain: if Canada pushes for increased mining production for military, national security, and national defense purposes, it will inevitably cause further harm to the environment and to the rights of Indigenous people and local communities. Both domestically and internationally, Canada and its provinces claim to distinguish themselves by their ability to produce not only critical minerals, but also responsible ones. We do not share this view. Governments should start by enshrining the United States Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples in mining laws, recognizing that safeguarding clean water and air is vital to Canada's national security, and focusing their efforts on achieving mineral sobriety across all minerals and sectors, including national defense. That is to say, we need to reduce Canada's overconsumption of minerals. There is a cost to rushing mining project approvals. This opens the door to bad mining projects that are dangerous to the safety of workers, Indigenous peoples, local communities, and the environment. The Government of Canada must also close the door to seabed mining for military or other purposes. The National Defense Strategy related to so-called critical minerals must not rely in any way on the use of nuclear energy. Like a large part of civil society, we denounce the diversion of funds and efforts related to the energy transition. The climate emergency is a real and present danger to national security, not just a vague geopolitical threat. We cannot negotiate peace with nature. So, thank you very much for your attention and for considering our recommendations and our brief on the nexus between critical minerals, national defense, and national security. Thank you, Mr. Turgeon.
Back to our virtual panel, and Heather Exner Piro, n'est-ce pas? Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, committee members, for the opportunity to speak to you today. When we first started talking about and prioritizing critical minerals, probably around 2019, it was largely in the context of the energy transition and the need for minerals to replace fossil fuels. Following the COVID-19 pandemic, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and American concerns with the Chinese rivalry, the policy focus has recently turned to critical minerals roles in defense supply chains. After a late start, I would say the G7 and Western nations, including Canada, are starting to take the issue seriously, and some advances are being made. But this attention has also served to reveal how serious and complex the issue is. I want to make a few points to kick off the discussion in my opening remarks. First is how we define critical minerals. There is a clear distinction between minerals that are important to the economy and trade, minerals important to electrification, and minerals that are essential to defense and industrial processes but have been monopolized intentionally by China. I think the focus of defense policy should be to intervene in markets for niche products that the free market can't or won't resolve on its own because the market has been manipulated. I don't think that's nickel and lithium. I think that's gallium, germanium, graphite, and rare earths. Second is the issue of stockpiles. The issue is getting thrown around without much thought or sophistication. It's obvious stockpiles are not the solution for most critical minerals. Either a stockpile would disrupt normal market functions, or be too expensive to manage, or be too logistically difficult, or we would be stockpiling a resource that we don't have the capability to process and refine. I think the processing and refining capacity issue is much more difficult and should be the focus of coordination with allies and in coordination with manufacturers and processors. I expect those conversations are happening behind the scenes, but it'd be good to bring more political attention to them. I want to highlight one more issue. Canada excels at resource extraction, and we have ample supplies. This would be enormously helpful in the case of a protracted conflict with an adversary, as we have latent capacity to supply raw materials into NATO defense supply chains. We have lost much of our expertise and knowledge in how to translate raw materials into energetics and munitions and products needed for weapons. Some of this is a result of ideological preferences the last 2 or 3 decades that has shunned research for military purposes. As I understand, we have lost both internal government capability in defense labs and have precluded NSERC funding for research focused on offensive military technology. I bring this up because the new defense industrial strategy specifically mentions nitrocellulose, a byproduct of forestry that is essential for energetics. But we need to translate the raw materials into something useful for weapons, and I suspect we have lost much of that technical ability. Much as we are focused on the value add for raw materials in the broader economy, so we need to ensure that we have more value add capability in Canada in defense supply chains. Finally, I will point out that much of China's dominance in critical minerals came from its willingness in the last decade to invest in the supply chain counter-cyclically. That had allowed it to take much more market share, and our reliance on private investment in the free market meant we were largely on the sidelines. We are now in the upswing of the commodity cycle, so some shortages and scarcity will now be resolved by the market. I think we need to focus our scarce resources on those few goods that won't be. I would say the NATO critical minerals list and the China export restrictions list point us in the right direction. Thank you for your attention. I look forward to questions.
Thank you very much as well. I'll turn it over now to Mr. Balsillie. You have up to 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you for the invitation to appear today. Your study is important and timely. I encourage you to also include economic considerations in this nexus because the economy and our security are two sides of the same coin. Canada's policy thinking remains rooted in the 1970s, an economy that no longer exists, which has caused a systemic erosion of our prosperity and productivity over the past 35 years. Recent strategic actions of leverage against Canada by multiple large nation-states have laid bare that our sovereignty and security were concurrently eroding over the same period because of this outdated thinking. The digital transformation over the past 35 years has created a new kind of economy in which wealth, power, and security are rooted in the ownership of intangible assets of IP and data AI. These assets behave differently in the market than tangible goods and require different strategies. As shown in Appendix 1, they have grown to dominate, making up over 92% of the S&P 500's $55 trillion total value. As summarized in Appendix 2, the tangible and intangible economies operate in opposite ways, with the intangible economy of negative rights and economic rents governed by domestic and international frameworks that are constantly changing to create winners and losers, thus incenting strategic behavior, including leverage. I will summarize the examples I present in the ensuing appendices, where the US, EU, and China have developed sophisticated capacity and strategies to utilize these legal frameworks to advance their prosperity and security via value-added products and process technologies in the realms of defense and critical minerals. Then I conclude what Canada needs to do urgently. In Appendix 3, I list examples of how in 2025 the U.S. advanced their interests via legal frameworks, such as their AI White Paper, Genius Act for tokenization, an array of tariffs, and the flexing of IP march-in rights. In Appendix 4, I summarize how the U.S. national security strategy integrated these into one document, illuminating the role of strategic standards, adding resource security, including critical minerals, and much more. In Appendix 5, I show that while we were aware of the recent high-profile U.S. exit from 66 international organizations, they doubled down their participation in 3 international standards organizations that govern value chains for advanced products and process technologies for critical mineral and defense sectors, and many other sectors as well. In Appendix 6, I note how the U.S. Patent Office concurrently created a working group to create and insert more patents from their SMEs into global standard organizations and by extension into global value chains, all to lock in and profitably grow their companies. Appendices 7 and 8 illuminate aggressive U.S. tokenization strategies for both financial and real-world assets, including critical minerals and mines. Appendix 9 summarizes how the EU uses standards, particularly via CENELEC, for the value chains for defense and critical minerals, just like the U.S. and China do. Appendices 10 and 11 show soaring granting of patents for mining, defense, and AI, with Canada essentially absent. Appendix 12 summarizes how China has strategically built dominance in critical mineral value chains of processing, patents, and standards alongside traditional supply chains of mines. As you can see, Canada requires a wholesale reorientation of how a sovereign nation must be governed in the 21st century economy if we want greater global scale from our promising companies and gifted entrepreneurs. The strategies I have identified today are all and strategies, not or strategies, when it comes to capitalizing our natural resources, but they are technical and require expertise. Absent these updated approaches, Canada will again not achieve better outcomes for Canadians. The November federal budget and the recent defense industrial strategy were missed opportunities to reorient away from failed approaches in the past. I will close with a quote from an expert in an article stating that in this modern economy, FDI should not be an article of faith, because without shrewd insertion into value chains of intangibles, a country can host large foreign-owned production facilities and impressive export volumes while capturing only a thin slice of the value created. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Balsillie. Those for members, I know the report that Mr. Balsillie is speaking of in the appendices have been distributed to the clerk. They're being translated for the purposes of being, but I think some of you have received a courtesy of Mr. Balsillie. I think you brought a few hard copies. Mr. Savard-Tremblay, I'm not sure if you had a copy or not, but we are going to get it translated as well. To our last witness to provide us 5 minutes is Mr. Sean Boyd. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And my name is Sean Boyd. I'm Chair of the Board of Agnico Eagle Mines Limited. And on behalf of Agnico Eagle, it's my pleasure to speak to the Standing Committee today on a topic that we all know is of great importance to Canada, and it's one where Agnico Eagle, given our long history and expertise in mining, we feel we can be of service to the Government of Canada. I'll focus today my remarks on 3 areas where we can provide some guidance to the committee. The first is on the defense industrial strategy, particularly in the Arctic. It's nice to see a comprehensive strategy, but we feel the emphasis when we talk about sovereignty needs to start with the sort of socioeconomic benefits and support in communities. Strong communities is strong sovereignty. We have some thoughts on incentives to promote defense mineral production in Canada, particularly from not only our long experience in mining in Canada, but also from our newly created wholly owned subsidiary, Avenir Minerals, which has a focus on critical metals and strategic metals in Canada, and also talk about the potential alignment between Canadian mining companies, particularly those operating in the North, and the federal government, with opportunities for collaboration and partnership, and we have specific examples on this. I should say It's important to have a strategy, but it's also really important to ensure that we get effective and efficient execution of that strategy. And that's where mining companies come in with experience and skills, particularly in the north, working with the government to achieve the objectives. And we have to remember mining's a tough business. We're often governed by nature and economics. We can't put deposits where we'd like them to be, so there's a lot of work to do, but we still see tremendous opportunity. Agnico Eagle is Canada's largest mining company. We've grown from a very small company to be the second largest gold producer in the world, and we've done it with 85% of our business based in Canada with 14,000 employees. We have 7 mines in Ontario, Quebec, and Nunavut. We produce more than half of Canada's gold, which is Canada's second largest export in 2025. We're one of the largest corporate taxpayers in Canada, $2.7 billion. That number will be higher in 2026. And we're the largest payer to Indigenous groups under benefit agreements in the country, over $200 million, and we expect that number to rise significantly in 2026. So we're deeply committed to Canada's north. We have 2 mines in Nunavut, the Meadowbank Complex in Meliadine in the Kivalliq region, and the Hope Bay Project, which is on our northern coast. And since 2007, almost 20 years, in Nunavut, we've invested over $10 billion, and we're currently roughly 22% of the GDP of Nunavut. We've got 400 Inuit employees among 4,000 employees in Nunavut, so a significant contributor to the economies. In 2021, following the Government of Canada's decision to block a sale to a Chinese firm, Agnico Eagle purchased the Hope Bay mine on Canada's northern coast. Since that time, we've invested over $1 billion at the site, and we now have a plan to redevelop and reopen this mine with the support of the Kitikmeot Inuit Association, along with an investment by Agnico Eagle of over $2 billion. And we plan to announce the go-ahead on this project in the spring. Hope Bay is an interesting project given the time we're in and the moment we're in as a country. Although not on the major project list, its timing in terms of moving it forward and a significant investment on the Northwest Passage really sends a strong signal to our allies and our adversaries of Canada's assertion of sovereignty in the Arctic. It drives national economic growth. It strengthens and sustains northern communities. It develops significant infrastructure, important infrastructure for the North. It creates meaningful employment, high-paying jobs, and it advances Indigenous economic reconciliation. So it's an important project which forms the basis of continued investment by Agnico in Canada's north in partnership with communities and in partnership with the government. I think as we all know, Russia spent considerably more on infrastructure in the Arctic than any other Arctic nation, with 17 deep water ports while Canada has none. Canada is a frontline NATO country sharing the largest maritime border in the world with Russia, meaning we have a sizable commitment for collective security, and really there's no time to waste on this. But the Arctic region presents Canada with an opportunity to contribute to national and collective security in a way that is uniquely Canadian. It can suit our national identity and provides an opportunity to the federal government to demonstrate not only to the world, but to Canadians of the importance of the North in our future. A great first start with the Canada Defence Industrial Strategy, which places a significant emphasis on Canada's North and the Arctic and the need to provide sovereignty in this vital region. But as we say, it all depends on effective and efficient execution. Building mines, really, when you do it properly, is really about building community. And when it's done in the North, it's also about building the nation. And to ensure the success and wide support, Canada's approach to Arctic defense must be part of a broader socio-economic strategy that understands sovereignty is fundamentally about people and the communities and the strength of the communities and the opportunities that exist in those communities. One of the keys to ensuring strong communities is education. With 1/3 of its 40,000 people under the age of 15, Nunavut is home to Canada's youngest population. At the same time, None of it has the lowest high school graduation rates, with only about 50% completion rate, resulting in only about 300 high school graduates per year across the entire territory. Obviously, when you think about investments in mining, along with investments in defense and investments in community infrastructure, we're going to need a lot more highly skilled workers to allow us to efficiently execute. I'll put this in context. As we mentioned, okay, yep. So just in context, when you look at $10 billion of Agnico spending since 2007, with the plans to spend multiples of that over the next several years, the key to making this work is the coordination of the strategy and an effective procurement of skills and skills training and development. Thank you for the opportunity.
We all appreciate the witnesses being here before us. We're going to start our first round of questions, and we're going to start with Mr. Anderson. Over to you for 6 minutes, sir.
Thank you very much. This question is for Dr. Exner-Pirot, Mr. Balsillie. I'd like you to answer it, as well as Mr. Boyd. We've talked a lot about sovereignty. Critical to sovereignty is the actual ownership of the materials. And Pierre Poilievre has talked a lot about using those materials as leverage as a middle power. We don't have a lot of hard power, but we do have some soft power, and we can use those as leverage. So with respect to critical and rare earth minerals, my primary concern is the monitoring of foreign ownership. Is the current 20 to 25% threshold that triggers review, is that sufficient? Would you answer that, Mr. Balsillie?
I would say control is a complex thing, and as I said, FDI should be carefully monitored, not only for economic spillovers, but for security spillovers. I would also say that owning the minerals does not in and of itself give you leverage if you do not own the ability to turn them into something. So it is the beginning of the potential for leverage, but in and of itself, it's not leverage.
Thank you much. Dr. Exner-Pirot?
Yeah, I wish I could say it doesn't depend on the context, because sometimes people just need a number that they can work with and be predictable. But it kind of depends on the context. And I would think probably the most susceptible are junior miners and small projects. And if they, are looking for investment and they would take it from anywhere they can get, where they may not go ahead. If they don't get some investment from some kind of investor, then I think they're susceptible to Chinese investment. And then the other aspect is for some of these niche metals that we talked about, China has a basic monopoly on the process and refining. So at some point you have to work with some Chinese interests, because they're going to be the only person taking your offtake. And so I don't want to do this on a case by case, but 20%, maybe, I think Australia does 10% as a threshold. And I think it's much different depending on the size and whether it's publicly owned or privately owned. But absolutely that this is a way that the Chinese have used to influence junior mining operations. And I think another, consequence of that people are concerned about, if you did have a project, for example, in the Arctic, and there was Chinese influence, that they could, for example, use their leverage to do, monitoring or jamming, or have some presence in the Arctic that might interfere, for example, with NORAD.
More broad-based questions, Mr. Boyd. Mr. Boyd?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, thank you. I would agree with Heather. It's context, and a lot of this will depend on the opportunity and the deposit and the importance of the deposit to the country. So I think we're the beneficiary of a foreign investment review, which resulted in us owning a project on our northwest coast, which we talked about in Hope Bay. So this was important to ensure that property, given its location and its benefit to the region, was in Canadian hands. So we're the beneficiary of that. So when you look at critical metals, though, I think you have to balance the need for capital, the need for skills, in the context of, can this project be an important part of the country's economic future? So you have to weigh and measure that. And I think as the government looks at that, it should also take into consideration the skills that exist in the country in moving those particular projects forward. And it also bears on where the country plans to invest in infrastructure. As we open up new areas, we should be mindful of where those critical projects are and the impact that the infrastructure is going to have on those investments and making them more investable and understanding where the ownership currently lies with those major projects.
The federal government can do to encourage companies to invest in mining to the north?
Mining is difficult and challenging, particularly in the north, and I think it's to improve the certainty, and I think the government has gone a long way in terms of moving the permitting and approval process forward in a timely fashion. We look at something like our Hope Bay project and the restart. It's taken multiple years and we still have permits. So it's tough, but anything we can do to work in partnership with the government to understand the opportunity. But I think, as we see, the key to unlocking it all is going to be skills. Not only procuring those skills from outside Canada, but also in terms of training to make sure we have those skills to realize the potential.
Certainty, and that's Mr. Basili, could you pick up on regulatory certainty as a driver of economic?
Well, of course, economic certainty is critical, but you also need the certainty that you have the ability to turn it into something that gives you the economics and the leverage you're looking for. So the regulatory certainty for the mine is one thing, but also the regulatory certainty that you're creating products that are anchored into the global supply chains and value chains is equally important, or you're only competing on the commodity part of the economy.
Okay. Dr. Exner-Perot, how exposed are northern mineral projects to single points of failure, those being roads, ports, one power source, those sorts of things?
Well, I'm sure Mr. Boyd can answer this too, but I will say, there's one operating mine in the Yukon right now. It's a silver mine, so it's not a critical mineral, but it's obviously important to the economy. Because Yukon is lacking in energy infrastructure, especially electricity infrastructure, they've had to curtail their production many times this winter and last winter as well. And so I think electricity is maybe the main bottleneck to expanding northern mines right now. I think probably for Agnico, and Mr. Boyd can answer it, they bring their own energy. They bring their diesel generators, but for some smaller projects, if that's not possible, or if there are some policies that prevent relying on diesel, that is absolutely being an inhibitor. And I think of a copper mine, Casino Copper in Yukon, for example, where probably that access to electricity is the biggest barrier for them being able to move that project ahead.
Sorry, Mr. Anderson. Thank you very much to all of you. I'm going to pass it over to Vivian Lapointe. Over to you for 6 minutes.
Chair. I'd like to welcome Dr. Mikachuk to the committee and thank her for her appearance here this morning. Attended PDAC, the large mining conference that was held in Toronto. And the federal government announced the creation of the Canadian Digital Core Library, which will digitize decades of drill core samples using advanced technologies and AI. Can you tell us from a strategic perspective how improved access to this kind of geological data help Canada better understand and secure its critical mineral resources?
Happy to answer that, Member Lapointe. The announcement of the partnership with CDL and Laurentian University being the academic lead on that project. It is a very exciting nation-building project. We have millions of meters of drill core that has been, in many cases, held in private company libraries, some in the Canadian Geologic Survey, Ontario Geologic Survey, and other provincial repositories, but there has not been a large effort to digitize and make that data available. So this project is ambitious. It is looking to scan that inventory of core, aiming to scan 1 million meters of core in the first year using a variety of multispectral and other scanning technologies to provide a broad cross-section of elemental characterization on these drill cores, and also make that data available then to digital and AI analysis. That will allow for us to go back to a lot of the deposits that had been drilled maybe decades ago and overlooked. It will save, per project, even, hundreds of thousands of dollars for drill campaigns that would otherwise still need to be done in areas where we may already have a lot of that knowledge that is wrapped up in these drill cores. So it will really position Canada to very quickly reassess our potential for new mining development and really go back and look at core that was never analyzed for other elements that are now on the critical minerals list and rare earths and others that might be associated with those mineralogies. So it is a very important project and one that will quickly help Canada add to its knowledge of its mineral reserves.
Thank you. Now, we know that Canada has the geology for many critical minerals, but a lot of the refining and processing still happens abroad. And we heard from Vale, who were a witness here the week previous, where they said they have to actually import nickel to keep their refining operations going in Sudbury. In a geopolitical situation that we are in now, what risk does this kind of dependence create for Canada's ability to secure the materials needed for our defense and energy systems?
That's also for me, Vivian?
Yes.
Yes. I'm sure Sean and others will speak to this as well. The capacity that we have is still underutilized. So the example that you mentioned with Vale here in Sudbury with our two smelters and nickel refinery, there are times that there's not enough process and not enough feed going through the process. We are starting to lose midstream processing capacity at operational mines. We are not building them fast enough. And so we are still relying and have relied for decades on exporting a lot of the raw material and concentrates elsewhere. So there is a huge potential, I think, to not only maximize the usage of existing facilities by helping those facilities diversify processing capability to allow for a variety of custom feeds, whether that is for recycling or secondary material recovery, to make sure that our existing capacity and operations are used fully and could then also accept different types of materials during downtimes. So that, I think, is a key piece for us to look at in terms of shoring up domestic supply chain and midstream processing capacity.
Mr. Boyd, I also had an opportunity to talk to some of your colleagues at Agnico Eagle's mines last week at PDAC, and I want to applaud Agnico Eagle for being a partner in that drill core library that we were just. I do want to ask a question. We know that climate change and increased accessibility are changing the strategic landscape in the Arctic. How does that shift affect the urgency of strengthening Canada's presence and economic activity in the north?
Thank you. I think that there's a definite sense of urgency around geopolitical concerns, obviously, and sovereignty in the north. As we look at global warming, it's certainly going to open up the opportunity to move around and create access. The challenge that we have now when we think about northern operations is we're dealing with a 2 to 3 month barge season where effectively you have to get your materials and energy supplies up in that small window. As that window broadens, I think it creates more opportunity. It does make it difficult in terms of road building, in terms of permafrost, in terms of construction. So I think that has to be built in. I think when we look at the question of how do we take advantage of what we have, I think it's important in your last question to use existing infrastructures, and the core scanning is a tool. But when you think about it, a lot of the old mines were left with tremendous potential, holes undrilled due to commodity prices. And when we look at the gap between what we're promising the world in terms of our ability to deliver critical metals. There still needs to be lots of deposits discovered. So a quick way to get started is to revisit old mining districts, because not only are you benefiting from infrastructure, you're benefiting from the knowledge of deposits and using core scanning as a tool, but you're also dealing with and being able to leverage off of community partnerships. So you have to build all of this into the mix when you're looking at economic opportunities and mine building. Mine building isn't as much a science as an art, particularly when you're working in the north, and it's going to take tremendous partnerships. But using a lot of the history of what we've already built in Canada is an important first start.
Mr. Lapointe. Monsieur Sabat-Tremblay, you have up to 6 minutes, sir.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Merci à l'ensemble de nos...
Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all of our witnesses. Thank you for being here today and all of your presentations. Mr. Turgeon, I heard a lot of presentations in my life, and I think it is quite legitimate to make suggestions about how to optimize and better use. And obviously, it is important on industrial strategy and the use of critical minerals is important. If I understood correctly what you said yes, but let's not forget human beings, and let's not forget the air, then the water that we all need, and all of the rights that are involved. First of all, what is it we're talking about exactly when we're talking about industry and extraction of minerals that already exist in Canada? Because I feel like asking you, what are we talking about? Because first of all, it seems to be so easy. And you say you just need a BP box in Canada. You just need just to be in Canada. What kind of things do you need, fiscally speaking, stock exchange? What are we talking about, first of all? And is there a real Canadian mining interest, strictly speaking in numbers? Is it actually profitable?
Monsieur le député, pour votre question.
Thank you for your question, Mr. Chair. You're quite right in saying that we have to get back to the definition of what it is we mean. Today, we are discussing critical minerals, and one of the witnesses today has talked to us about a big company that doesn't extract critical minerals, or very few. At least I'm talking here about Agnico Eagle and gold. And gold is not part of the critical mineral list. So when we're talking about critical minerals, let's get back to the definition, which is under the strategy, the Canadian strategy, and it is in link directly with supply chains. And then we can ask ourselves, which supply chain are we talking about? Are we talking about Canadian supply chain or allied supply chain? Because if we're in that line of thinking and we look at the mines that have been identified as being important for critical or strategic interests of the provinces or the federal government, we realize many of these mines have investments by foreign entities, foreign states, departments that are actually linked directly to interests that could be threatening. So this is where the provinces and the federal government must tighten the conditions in order to have access and control of the minerals. And this is and I get back to what I was saying a while ago. It seems that the government doesn't want to tighten, but to open the doors to foreign investments. And then how do we then control these supply chains in order to define these interests as being Canadian? Well, yes, where is the danger? I remember the Minister of Industry a few years ago say we have to think about this, and then we have to get I understand what you're talking about when you're talking about China, but with all these umbrella companies and all of the different registering mechanisms that can happen, we can go through one mean or another. So what is the response to these kinds of numerous strategies that can exist? Well, it's important to understand that almost 50% of mine companies are registered in Canada, especially Ontario, and they're on the Toronto Stock Exchange. And they benefit this way from many strategies and optimization and fiscal conditions. And this is why actually we are alluding to the PDAC conference, which is the biggest mining conference that always happens in Toronto for these particular reasons. But it's not because these companies are registered here that they are necessarily going to serve Canadian interests ultimately. And this is where we have to clarify things. The federal government needs to be more transparent in its understanding of who are the foreign companies, who are the foreign states that are in Canada, and be identified as being part of strategic and critical supply chains. And this exercise has not been carried out so far. It has been referred to the Ministry of Finances back in 2022 to identify which companies are linked to the Chinese government and they had to cease operations. But we haven't seen this kind of action multiplied lately. And this is why it's so important to be coherent and to be transparent when it comes to the critical mineral strategy. Otherwise, we'll feel that the strategy is just to accelerate any old mining project and create wealth for the mining companies, but not necessarily make the link to defense of the Canadian supply chains. Well, we know that one of the first things that was done, and it's as legitimate, but from the moment that we have to consider that we had considered we needed to increase the GDP expenditure, and we started playing with categories, and we started saying, okay, existing spending before really increasing the financing or the so we considered just depends. So I know that in some cases it's illegitimate and there are elements like that where things are entirely justified. But what you're saying gold, is gold really being calculated as a critical mineral extraction? Well, there's a lot of pressure being done from the mining lobby, and gold is the most important extraction happening in Canada. It represents at least 20% of mineral delivery. So there's a very powerful gold lobby. And apart from gold and natural resources, we have to ask ourselves the question as to what will be the impact of this on military spending. Thank you very much.
I am going now to a 5-minute round. Mr. Kibble, over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all of our witnesses for their opening statements. Ms. Mikachuk, I appreciate your comment that Canada's strategic vulnerability is our processing capability. What steps should we be putting in place to make processing more feasible, specifically in human resources and building a skilled workforce?
Thank you for the question. Certainly, I think historically Canada had a lot of that midstream capability. Many of the major operators had a lot of that processing, optimization, piloting. For example, Sheridan Park Valley, now Valley Base Metals, used to have over 60 personnel looking at different process optimization and training the next round of metallurgists and process engineers. We've lost a lot of that capacity. Another Canadian example, Sherritt Technologies, has recently closed their operations with over 60 experts in process design and metallurgy also being let go. So now is not the time to be closing these facilities. We should be very quickly establishing regional centers of expertise, much like Mr. Boyd said, building on operations that already exist where we can leverage some of that capacity.
Thank you. I just want to quickly ask about waste and tailings. There's a historic waste site on Vancouver Island in my riding with copper and possibly cobalt. Is that something that you said efficient recovery? Can that be extracted and then left in a clean state when that process is over?
Absolutely. This is a huge opportunity for Canada with a very large inventory of legacy sites. Consider that these are mineral resources already sitting at the surface. We do have that process knowledge to be able to rapidly develop process flow sheets for these materials. They're near term. We could develop a lot of these tailing sites within 5 years as opposed to a 15, 20-year timeline still for new mines. So we should be looking to leverage that process knowledge within Canadian institutions to be able to extract those reserves in the near term.
Thank you very much, Mr. Boyd. I just wanted to speak on timelines for project approvals. We heard of a Yellowknife project the other day that was taking 14 years to get approvals. We have oil and gas offshore prohibitions and large protected areas, many under the 30-30 plan. What steps do you see could be taken by the government to speed up approvals process in this area that's so critical to our national defense?
Yeah, I think that the challenge that we faced as an industry is the overlap of approvals that are required and the sequential movement of the files through the various regulatory approval bodies. So our approach would see the files go in and be reviewed simultaneously by many departments. So I think that would help. I think we've seen moves in that direction going forward. I think that what was happening where the federal overlay came in at operations over 5,000 tons a day or proposed operations over 5,000 tons a day, that created a duplication. So essentially we need to eliminate that duplication. Not only does it take time, it costs money and uses up resources. So I would start there.
You said in your testimony that it was important we know who are the foreign companies that are operating in Canada. And I see that your Mining Watch Canada is a lobby group founded in 1999. Are you still a registered lobby group?
We're not.
You're not a registered lobby group anymore. Interesting. And with regard to foreign companies operating in Canada, who's your largest donor for your organization?
Good question. I would have to look at it where I can submit the information.
I can share with you that it's the United States-based anti-development, anti-commercial agricultural group, the 11th Hour Project, which is funded by the Schmidt family group. So that's outside American influence that's paying for some of the words today. You were advocating closing the door on seabed mining. Does that include oil and gas?
We're talking about the minerals.
Minerals, not so you're open to oil and gas, but you're advocating we don't do mineral seabed mining.
That's not what I said. The topic of today's hearing is about the hard rock mining, I believe, because we're talking about criticals, but we're definitely not supporting oil and gas activities overseas.
But seabed mining in Canada, you're advocating for or against oil and gas mining in Canada?
Comme je l'ai dit, nous nous concentrons sur les
said we are concentrating on mining operations and hard rock mining, and we are opposed to seabed mining. But of course, we want to protect anything that protects the climate.
Quickly then, you also mentioned no use of nuclear power for defense-related projects. How would you contend that we power our, especially in the north, defense-related projects up through carbon-based fuel or through windmills?
Merci. Notre organisation depuis 20...
Our organization has, for 27 years, had only been very firmly opposed to uranium mining, considering all of the dangers that it entails for local populations when it comes to waste, residues, and also the risks of
Mr.
for defense projects.
Mr. Kibble, we're done on this one.
Thank you,
sorry, I
Mr. Chair.
apologize.
Nope.
My apologies.
Thank you.
Mr. Watchorn, over to you for 5 minutes.
Président, ma première question, c'est pour Monsieur Boyd.
First question is for Mr. Boyd. Mr. Boyd, you said that mining companies and yours invest a lot of money in the north in order to have your presence. I'd like to understand, how can we collaborate with you as the government, with defense and different mining industries and local communities in order to make sure that infrastructure be useful for all entities, so dual use or even triple use?
Yeah, I think that's the way forward. Government doesn't have a bottomless pit of money to invest, so it needs to be done strategically. And as we've said from the start, the Canadian military and Department of National Defence needs to know what the mining companies are thinking and doing. They need to know where the best rocks are. and the industry needs to know generally what the Canadian military is thinking. And so one of the things that we've already started is we're working with the Department of National Defense right now on a high-level sort of cooperation framework covering areas like personnel opportunities and technical knowledge sharing, community and Indigenous relationships and partnerships based on our experience, Arctic infrastructure and logistics, because we would argue we have superior logistical capacity than the Canadian military in a lot of respects, having built a number of mines. And so it's really around how we can collaborate. It's important that these discussions have begun, and we've actually moved them along a fair amount in the last year. So this is where we're going to get alignment, because we understand what the community needs are. We understand what the Canadian government is looking at doing in terms of their major infrastructure projects. We have an understanding of what the Canadian military is doing. So it's really about coordinating all these efforts and sharing knowledge that we've gained 20 years of doing business in the North.
Yeah.
Fine, thank you. So there's many infrastructures, and there are other companies as well that have airstrips and roads and ports and even capacity for housing, so that we can use for our presence in the Arctic.
Yes, that is correct. And so we're actually looking at ways where we can get the Inuit associations to draw down on the Indigenous loan program to invest in certain infrastructures as we think about some of these big projects. So it's really a matter of coordinating the programs in place, but understanding where the strategic leverage comes from government investment, and combined with investment by companies in the North.
J'aimerais poser une
Thank you
question.
very much. I'd like to ask a question to Dr. Mikachek. As an engineer, I find it fascinating to talk about biomining. Could you explain a little bit how it actually works? What is biomining, and how can we take advantage of these tailings and these residues that are left over?
En anglais?
Thank you for the question. I will answer in English.
The biomining process technologies, these have been around for over 50 years. There have been over 300 commercial operations globally, and Canada has yet to deploy a large-scale biomining process. So what we're using as the catalyst to break down the minerals are naturally occurring bacteria. These often are found in mine waste deposits and have adapted to the particular conditions at that site. So rather than using heat or chemicals, we use bacteria to act as the catalyst to break down minerals and then release those into solutions so that we can recover them. So this is a tested technology, but it has not had the time to mature and be deployed at commercial scales in Canada. And so it is the ideal, one of the ideal solutions to deploy for reprocessing tailings or low-grade materials that would be too costly to put back into a smelter or a large CapEx operations. And so we're working very hard to accelerate those with our partners to have an additional tool processing technology for various materials that could be deployed quite quickly.
Et puis au niveau économique, est-ce que c'est
As for the economics, is it actually something that is profitable? Is it economically viable?
Demonstrating economic viability, the key thing that we need to consider when we're reprocessing tailings is that we're not simply going to go after one or two elements. We have to valorize and extract all the value in those tailings so that we're also solving the environmental liability and looking at the usually large array of material or minerals in that particular material. So we are working with techno-economic assessment to show that this is in fact viable, and that has been, a lack of imagination in trying to take all of the value out of the materials that we've mined in the past.
Merci. Tremblay, 2.5 minutes, sir.
Mr. Savard Tremblay. Thank you very much. Let's be clear, Mr. Turgeon, just like my friend to my right here, in every sense of the word, has decided to attack the messenger. But I don't feel that you are the spokesperson for the White House right now. So let's not waste too much time on that. Absolutely not. And if I can be specific, I think the question that I thought that was for all of us concerning the position, my post, we are not financed neither by the mining industry or the Canadian government. So we have different sources of financing. Associations, personal, and foundations. The foundation that pays my salary is the ECO Foundation in Montreal, as well as the Trottier Foundation. So I am not here in front of you today, and I am not under American leadership here. No, I didn't think so. So that being said, we were saying a while ago that you had to look at the rising expenses and what the consequences could be. Yes, I'm rather surprised today that the only time that we've talked about climate crisis, apart from me, was one other witness who did say that climate change would be an opportunity in terms of access, and it's actually a threat, let's be clear, when it comes to national security and others. And so if you push as a country in order to increase military spending and in minerals is going to have an impact on the environment that is unthinkable in our opinion. And there are also questions: is Canada capable of supplying these minerals, especially if we think about the needs for defense, and where are we going to get these minerals, under what conditions? Will there be, in your opinion, a better way of doing things? Saying, yes, we'll do extraction, but we'll do a circular economy, we'll do a recuperation and recycling and all of that. Is that possible? The approach that we think about is sobriety and reduction at the source. But yes, in order to ensure better economic conditions for local communities and for the whole country, we would be going towards processing, like my colleague to my right said a while ago. But we also the other Laurentian University witness also talked about recycling and valorization of all components. This is also something to be considered environmentally speaking. I'm out of time, I assume. Thank you.
Over to you for 5 minutes.
Mr. Basili, how vulnerable does China's control of over 80% of critical minerals and rare earth processing make Canada's defense industrial base today? And what specific binding policy changes would you recommend to build value-added IP in our rare earths processing?
Thank you for that. And IP is interrelated to AI and AI sovereign compute and data. It's also interrelated to standard setting. We have made ourselves low participants in the value chain, a commodity country, and that in parallel has made us vulnerable to predation and leverage. So we've painted ourselves into this corner because of inattention. The number one thing I would say, and I've written about this and advocated for this for a long time, is the PCO and the PMO has to create an economic council or an economic secretariat with expertise in this realm. It's a technical realm. We spend $7.5 billion every year on research with absolutely no strategies to capture the benefit of that. We have no strategies for data in the past 15 years of the data economy. We have no strategic participation in these standards economies. This is POGO. I've seen the enemy. The enemy is us. The one recommendation: build expert capacity, whether it's an economic council or a secretariat in the PCO, so that we begin to catch up what other nations have been doing for 25 years.
Okay, so what steps must Canada take to pivot from having our critical minerals and rare earths processed by our greatest military adversary, or should we be focusing on the processes and AI as you described?
Well, we have to. We have no sovereignty to turn these minerals into products. We don't. And it's an application that no other country in the world has done. So we must reorient. And it's because our thinking is rooted in the 1970s that production was sufficient, and it's not. That the ability to turn these into products and have leverage so that you're not easily weaponized against is where the action is. And I could give you much more than I shared today, what the EU, US, and China have been doing to capture these value chains, and we need to get into the game. And it's an abdication of responsibility. It's as simple as that.
How should government reform defense procurement rules so that the contracts involving the critical minerals derived technologies actually remain intellectual property and the economic benefits in Canada rather than flowing to the foreign subsidiaries and adversaries?
Very first thing we need to do is create a sovereign patent pool for the things that we do research for and to manage the residual rights so they can be shared across companies. And when a company gets bought, all those rights don't leave with it. The second thing we need to do is create some kind of sovereign compute data AI sandbox. And the third thing we need to do is we talk about being part of the EU safe stuff for financing. We have nothing to sell because we have not participated into chiseling into the value chains. Yes, we need capital. Yes, we need procurement, but absent the geo-expert and strategic ability to chisel into value chains, this will not work. We've spent tens, if not hundreds of billions of dollars over the last 20, 30 years, and we're consistently last place in productivity and innovation. And it's 100% attributable to inattention to how the innovation game is played globally. It's baffling to me.
Drawing from your RIM experience with secure technologies, what specific barriers have prevented Canada from scaling domestic defense tech champions that rely on our critical minerals resources? And what concrete changes to R&D funding, tax policy, and procurement would you urge this committee to recommend?
We've had a naive and sentimental conception that this is some kind of free market globally, when in fact these are all public-private frameworks advancing their companies globally, and we leave our companies at the altar while favoring foreign companies to come in here and take them over and capture all the value. So we need a proper assessment of spillovers for where we support, where we buy, the nature of foreign investment. I'm not against it, but you have to manage it for spillovers, just like every country does, no one more than the US, the EU, and Australia. And then we have to be creating these institutional infrastructures of standard setting with our companies, which we do not do, intellectual property for our companies, which we do not do, sovereign compute with data strategies for our ecosystems, which we do not do. And so this has been an inattention to how 92% of the world works. And then we wonder why we don't do better. It's a self-inflicted wound of thinking that's made us a prisoner. So my one recommendation is create capacity for how these work and understand that there's institutions and technocracies and cross-cutting ways that you can begin to capture. This is not about money. This could be reoriented in less than a year if we actually attuned to how the game is played globally.
Thank you, Ms. Basili. Ms. Galan, appreciate that. Ms. Raminato, you have up to 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And through you, I'd like to thank the witnesses for being here. Before I begin, though, this is my first intervention today, and I just want to say that my thoughts are with the cadets and the family members of those affected by the accident in Saint-Rose-de-Waldford, Quebec. And a special thank you to the first responders. I know we lost a cadet over the weekend in a tragic bus accident, so my thoughts are with their families. Mes pensées sont avec les victimes de l'accident.
With the victims of the accident.
Say the name wrong, my apologies. Mikachuk, thank you. We talked a little bit about, you referenced research and the importance of research in this domain. And I'm not sure if you're aware that as part of the Defence Industrial Strategy, we've created Borealis, and it's modernizing Canada's defence and national security innovation by accelerating the delivery of advanced technologies, aligning federal innovation efforts towards mission needs, connecting partners from government, academia, and industry. So essentially what we're going to be creating are these, what we call a DISH. It's a Defence Innovation Secure Hubs, and they're intended to provide secure mission-oriented environments that support sustained collaboration across these three pillars, and it'll enable research, development, and experimentation activities aligned with defense and security needs. Now, I understand that your Laurentian University has some expertise in this regard. What are your thoughts in terms of how applied research programs and testing facilities that scale new mineral recovery technologies from laboratory discovery towards industrial deployment can help build the domestic capabilities needed for secure and resilient critical mineral supply chains?
Thank you for the question. I'd also like to combine it with some of the suggestions that Mr. Bolzilli just made as well in terms of having a strategy. Applied research doesn't happen in a vacuum, and institutions across Canada, whether it is government research labs or academic ones, have often operated in silos. And so as I'm very happy to hear about Borealis and DISH. I think this will help create regional centers of excellence that hopefully can then be connected across the critical mineral spectrum as well as across the supply chain. And having a strategy that links expertise. These are multidisciplinary problems, whether it is for electrification or for the defense production technologies. And so there's a lot of synergies between those knowledge bases and capacity, but I think there needs to be overarching strategy and guidance to ensure that there are quick pivots that can be possible in these applied research centers, whether it is for deploying a decarbonization technology or battery production for surveillance or other deployment.
Thank you. My next question is for Dr. Exner-Pirot. You mentioned one of the mines in Yukon. You mentioned that because of a lack of electricity, they've had to reduce production, if I understood correctly. Could you elaborate a little bit more on the importance of, my colleague had referenced it as well, the importance of perhaps investing in terms of dual use. So as you know, Canada has made the commitment to reach the 5% GDP target by 2035, which would incorporate as well 1.5% GDP that could be used for dual use, both defense and for civilian use. Could you elaborate how we could perhaps leverage that to make sure that we are providing the resources that we need in the Arctic exploration and mining? If you could elaborate a little bit on that.
Sure. Yeah. Well, so any operation needs communication infrastructure, transportation infrastructure, and energy infrastructure. And the military needs that, and mining companies need that, and communities need that. And the more that you have it, the cheaper it can get. You can reach some scale, and it's better for everybody. And so, especially when we're talking about doing more basing, having more operations in the military, even just the NORAD sites themselves, they can be very energy intensive if you're actually trying to capture a lot of data, if that's what you're doing. Obviously, the more data you capture, the more energy you're using, the more that data that you can capture. And so everyone is looking at ways to increase energy infrastructure, but it's obviously very expensive. And so, as Mr. Boyd said, the more that we can leverage each other's energy infrastructure and use it for these multiple uses, then everyone can share kind of in this scale. We're obviously focused on transmission quite a bit, but that can be very expensive in the north because you're looking at very long lengths, and distance maybe from the generating facilities. Other options that mining operations are considering is LNG, trucking in LNG. Yukon is moving towards some of that. Diesel is very versatile, very useful, but obviously it is also expensive and also quite polluting. And so microreactors are looking like potentially that would be a very good medium-term solution. The American military is moving forward. I think they're going to have a test microreactor at the Elson Air Force Base in Alaska. I think most people think that's probably a very good fit. And so the extent to which the Department of Defense can advance and do some testing and do some of those first of a kinds for microreactors, that would, I think, be very beneficial and useful for mining companies and communities.
Thank you very much. Mr. Bazan, 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Witnesses for your great testimony today. It's really important as we're talking about how we continue to drive forward with our sovereignty and our defense capabilities and how critical minerals tie into that. And as was mentioned, the Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre has talked about wanting to do more in leverage. And Mr. Basili, you talked about leverage as well as other witnesses mentioned that we need to have the leverage in what we bring to the table. So we don't want to be just hewers of wood and drawers of water. We have to move forward and create extra jobs as well as provide extra value, not just to our Canadian economy, but what we actually bring to the table, not just the raw resources. So my question is to Mr. Basili, Professor Mikanchuk, and Professor Exner-Perot. We're talking about how we need to do more on the defense research side, and how we need to own that IP, and how that cross pollinates with the critical mineral sector. 10 to 12 critical minerals on the NATO list are produced, or we have in Canada. We have, as I think one of the witnesses says, this amazing endowment. So let's talk about how we capitalize on that and how we actually turn that into leverage that can be used in our conversations on everything from defense, security, and trade to how we drive forward as being a leader in the world rather than a follower. So just ask how, Defense Research Development Canada, one of those research organizations that I think we need to talk about bringing in some of that skill set, as well as how does that go back into our universities who are producing the next generation of employees.
Happy to respond to that. Again, if you read the Defense Industrial Strategy, it reads like it was written in the 1970s. I'm very pleased they're going to buy from Canadian companies. The money's going to be spent. There's absolutely no systemic strategies to capture the value from that. And we've done this for decades where we do all this great research and we don't get the economic benefits from it. First of all, we don't generate the IP as we should, we don't maintain control of it, and we don't have strategies to insert that into the rules for what's value. Very simple. If somebody has the patent for a left-hand drive car and somebody has the patent for a right-hand drive car, if they set the rules for a right-hand drive car, the person who owns that gets really rich and the person that owns the left gets steak knives. And so the rule, and setting the standards is very political. So this has to be an integrated, and by the way, if you ever looked at USMCA, it substantially governs how we're allowed to participate in standards, how we're allowed to manage our IP and manage our data. We're actually enshackled in very much of those rules to put us into a low value added way. So these are all examples of frameworks where others use them to expand their wealth and power and leverage and security, and we have not attended to that. And the chickens have come home to roost. So again,
You really are referring to, that's where the EU, the US, and especially China has taken away that ability for Canada to have, one, sovereign control of it, and two, to have that financial benefit from actually owning that.
We don't know that the war is going on, the battle's going on. We've abdicated from it, and I'm simply saying build the expertise right at the center of the PCO, an economic council, economic secretariat, and start being front-footed. We have all the potential to be much, much greater, but we cannot be stuck in 1970s thinking. I could multiply the information I've shared with you today, and it all goes back to the same point.
Other witnesses?
Yeah, I would love to jump in here. So at the end of the day, we're talking about our defense industrial supply chain. So these have economic implications, but we actually have to be able to defend ourselves and fight in wars and protect ourselves and our alliance. Canada only has 43 million people. We will never have a totally sovereign, independent defense supply chain. We depend on being part of an alliance. The best thing that we can do within that alliance to be that good player, to get that leverage and that influence, is to provide some raw materials into that alliance. So their defense supply chains in the United States and Europe could ramp up in the event of a conflict. If there's a war of attrition, China would win today. And so it's very important that we have that latent capacity and we could ramp up quickly and we could be that arsenal of democracy and make sure there's the raw materials to fight a protracted war. And so just to my earlier point, we did go through a period in Canada where we did not allow financing for defense companies. We have not been allowing research for military purposes. And I see that we've changed that on the financing side, which is good. We actually want our defense companies to be able to access loans and lending. But I still think we are not there yet on the research side. We haven't changed our mindset of actually wanting to create researchers who can do research that is used for military offensive purposes, which we need to be able to fight wars in this country.
Thank you. Thank you both. Monsieur Mallet, you have up to 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Chair. My first question, is to Mr. Boyd. During a recent visit to Australia, Prime Minister Carney welcomed Australia into the Critical Minerals Production Alliance under Canada's G7 presidency in 2025 to expand critical minerals production and processing capacity and diversify supply chains from mine to market. Both Canada and Australia hold vast reserves of critical minerals that are key to defense. So my question, and further to the discussion we had in the last line of questioning, how will the new critical minerals agreement between Canada and Australia strengthen cooperation in securing reliable supplies of strategic minerals, and what impact could this partnership have on diversifying and reinforcing defense supply chains among allied nations, in your view?
Well, it's when you think about Canada and Australia, they both have important endowments of critical metals and deposits. The key behind all of this is to actually find the deposits that currently make economic sense to develop. And from us, as we look at it, you can decide, oh, these metals are important, but unless you have those deposits in the right places and you can make an economic case that they need to be developed, then you're not going anywhere. And so I think those alliances will actually allow us to share information, but we already share information between companies at the industry level among mining companies. So we already share those technologies. So I think it's going to come from both Canada and Australia understanding they have the endowment, and then working together in partnership with the government on selective strategic infrastructure to make regions within both countries investable for investors. And so that's the bottom line. We forget about all this. I've spent time in Washington. You know, they're gung-ho, they're going to do this, they're going to do that, they're going to put capital here. But the missing link in all of this is the deposits in the right place that make economic sense and that you have the skills to be able to develop them. But we've talked about the key, again, is processing. Canada was a leader in mining and processing when we had the Falcon Bridges and the Norandas and the Incos and the Alcans, running refineries, building mines. We need to get back to that type of mindset. And it may be 1970s thinking, but that's going to be underlying the value creation, start of the value creation chain. What we do after that, I would agree with Mr. Basili, and I would agree with Nadia, and I would agree with Heather. We start to have to capture this technology and this research that will allow us to take advantage and improve the economics.
My next question is for Ms. McKittrick. How should Canada balance the urgency then of developing critical minerals with environmental stewardship and Indigenous partnership, something that hasn't been top of mind in our discussions today?
Thank you for bringing that important aspect to the forefront. I think certainly globally, everybody looks to Canada to lead in environmentally sustainable and equitable reconciliation with First Nations. And we, as already been outlined by some of the other witnesses, we can't simply meet the demands of decarbonization and defense by leaving a massive environmental legacy. And that the capacity, the technologies, the ability to have zero waste mining, to have equitable mining projects and partnerships with equity ownership by First Nations is entirely within the realm of possible and doable in Canada. And so that I think has to be at the forefront of discussions on new projects, or in our case, where we're looking at tailings reprocessing. We're absolutely able to have that win-win-win if we think strategically in not only extracting that value, but also reducing and removing environmental liabilities so that communities don't have the long-term impact of mineral development.
Do I have one more question, Mr. Chair? Thank you. My next question then is for Dr. Exner-Pirot. In your view, should Canada define economic security within the context of critical minerals and defense supply chains?
I think we should define it and we should prioritize the economic value of minerals. And so I think gold is actually extremely important to the Canadian economy, even though it's not a critical mineral. But in the context of defense spending and the defense industrial supply chain, it's clear to me that we should be focusing on things that we would need if we need to quickly ramp up the defense supply chain for NATO. And for me, usually what you need for military applications will be a very small portion of the market. You don't need, the global nickel supply chain, the global copper supply chain. You would need a small portion of that to be able to feed your defense supply chain. I think in terms of defense spending, what you could classify as NATO spending and get up to that 5% will again be on those minerals that are on the NATO mineral list and the things that China has put export restrictions on. Make sure we have some minimum capability in processing and using those things.
Heather. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Millet. Mr. Tremblay, 2.5 minutes, sir.
Merci. Monsieur Turgeon, on a bien entendu, je pense, vos appels.
Mr. Turgeon, we heard your calls for environmentally friendly practices. I have a difficult question for you. With all the power of China, do you think that we can afford a more modest approach? Do you think we can allow ourselves to do that, knowing that China has all this power? Are we condemning ourselves not to fight at equal strength? It's not up to us to answer that question. It's up to the government of Canada to define what are the real threats. What are the threats to Canada's supply chains? From that starting point, the Canadian government has to be consistent. It starts by transparency, and to be transparent in Canada's critical mineral supply chain. If China is identified as one of these threats, Canada must respond within its capacity by taking into account the global impact of the mining sector on national security. It's important to remind you that today's discussion doesn't only focus on national defense, but also on national security. If we increase the environmental impacts, and if we increase the impact on climate change by increasing our mining activities, this will have a direct impact on security and life of Canadians. This is something we know for sure. The climate crisis is a threat and has real impacts on all society, including on the mining sector. If we want a resilient economy, and if we want to support local economy, we need to act in all humility by taking into account the planet's capacity to supply these resources. It's not just about identifying where the deposits are, but also to look at our capacity to extract these resources, taking into account the different priorities, such as national defense. Between exploration and operation of a mine, there can be 10 to 20 years, and there are also some limits related to having the skilled labor to operate all the mines we'd like to open. So we need to target our priorities. Since we cannot supply all the minerals that we'd like to supply, we'd have to act with sobriety. I hear you when you say sobriety. You said it takes 10 to 15 between the discovery of new deposits and the opening of a new mine. In the fastest mines, it could take 10 years and up to 20 years. Some witnesses also spoke about reopening older mines that were closed when the prices of commodities were lower. But let's be honest, this is mainly for gold deposits. At the turn of the millennium, the price of gold went down drastically in the markets. But we're not talking about rare earth deposits that have not been exploited here, or graphite mines, or other elements that are on the list of critical elements. Thank you. Mr. Bazan, the floor is yours.
Back to Ms. Exner-Perot's comments about supplying more of our critical minerals as raw resources to our allies. Just take a look at lithium that we mine in Canada. One of the mines in Quebec, I know that they send only about a quarter of their lithium to the United States, because that's all the capacity the United States has to actually refine lithium. The rest of it goes to China. So, even within our allies, we don't have sovereign control, nor do our allies have sovereign control over that further upgrading and processing of these critical minerals that are so important to our national security and sovereignty. So, Mr. Baselli, you talked about missed opportunities within the defense industrial strategies, as well as in the last budget. You mentioned that we should be setting up a secretariat within the Privy Council office. Similar to, I guess, I know when we look back on the war in Afghanistan, the Conservative government of the day set up a secretariat of defense of the key ministers as well as deputy ministers to make sure that the civil service was driving the agenda to get the job done of procuring what we needed and to support our troops in theater. We need to have the same type of mentality and leadership to ensure that we get the job done to leverage our critical minerals and the downstream value added in IP?
Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. And these are nuanced issues, and you have to be careful, because people will misconstrue it as autarky, which is not at all what I'm saying. And if you listen to what I said in my testimony, I said it's an and issue. It's the 1970s issue and the contemporary issue. And if we do not start to do value add, if we do not start to own reasonable parts of the processing, reasonable parts of the value added and technologies, control reasonable parts of the data and the AI, reasonably participate in standard setting activities, we are going to an economic structure. We have evolved to something much closer to the Democratic Republic of Congo and Russia, rather than, say, a sophisticated Scandinavian economy. We have all the potential to do more. It's been an abdication of this. So yes, I'm 100% saying if we orient to this, do the and, which is not about money, it's expertise and orientation, I think we will see our prosperity and our security and our leverage soar. We've let our leverage go, but in this world, you corral your leverage if only for resilience. And so if we just push these to foreign countries, whether they're allies like the United States or complex relationships like China, we're still subject to leverage and predation all day, every day.
Okay, so do you believe that we should be making amendments to the Defense Production Act to ensure that the not just the mining of critical minerals and the stockpiling of critical minerals, but the processing of critical minerals is covered under the Defense Production Act as part of our sovereign control?
You could do that. You could do it through the budget. You could do it through an updated approaches in the defense industrial strategy. We could do it with proper considerations for the $7.5 billion that Canada does in research funding every year. We could do it in production or purchasing requirements under the PSPC, how they do it. We could do it with proper sovereign compute, which has yet to be implemented, and the utilization of our data. We could do it with updated spillover analysis in FDI things and having the kind of toolkit that Australians and Americans have in the institutions like CFIUS. It's a web of frameworks. That's what I tried to show you. This is a web structure, but that's why you have to create expertise and understand its tentacles in an integrated manner.
So that's where the tangible versus intangible comes into play, is that making sure that we have more connectivity between both levels and government leadership, but not necessarily ownership in all segments of that web.
Yeah, the tangible is not really contested. The oil in the oil sands, the minerals in a mine, you own that. But but how to turn that into something much more valuable, that 92%.
So you're not necessarily owned if it's done through FDI, through foreign direct
Yeah, but it's
investment.
physically owned in Canada. But you're right, there's complex control issues there. But the possession is here. But the possession of the ideas is through legal restriction. It works by totally different rules. We don't have that expertise in our negotiation with treaties like USMCA. We don't have it in our research strategies. We don't have it in our data strategies. We don't have our standard setting. We don't have it in our FDI. We don't have it in how we support our companies. And we've been last place in the OECD for the last 40 years. In this, we have eroding productivity. We have and it's 100% attributable to that lack of attention to this expert realm. And I reiterate, it's an and function, not an or function. I'm completely supportive of our natural resources. We have all the potential to get much more out of that. It's doing the both together, not one or the other.
Thank you, Ms. Wilson. Ms. Lapointe, 5 minutes.
Mr. Boyd, several allied countries are now seeking to diversify their mineral supply chains away from geopolitically risky jurisdictions. How can Canadian mining companies contribute to building more secure and more resilient networks amongst trusted partners? And Dr. Exner-Pito, I'll let you know that I'll be asking you the same question, except instead of what can Canadian mining companies do, I'll be asking you what can the government do to contribute to building those resilient supply chains?
Yeah, thanks. That's a really good question, and I think Canadian companies have been at the forefront of putting investments to work in other countries, both politically friendly countries and countries that have tougher geopolitical environments. And so we have that expertise, and we're basically lending that expertise now. We have enough expertise to do what we need to do at home, but I think Canadian companies, to be successful, should be taking that expertise from whether it's from exploration, whether it's project development, whether it's mine operations. We're extremely good at that. And we're predominant players in many continents because of the skills that we bring to the table. And there's a real lack of skills. And I can say that Agnico's been aggressively courted by U.S. interests to bring our expertise into the United States to help them develop critical metal deposits. So we have that expertise. We should be selective where we use it, and we should use it in instances where we're getting more direct benefit to our own companies and to our own countries. And when we look at ownership, Agnico Eagle is 50% owned by American institutions. We're 25% owned by European and Asian institutions, and we're only 25% owned by Canadian institutions. But even with that 70-year history, we're based in Canada, run by Canadians with a largely Canadian board of directors. That's what's more important, to be able to control those critical deposits here in Canada. But we shouldn't just be insular. We should look outward, and we should invest in those important geological districts to have some control over those metals and minerals.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for the question. So the number one thing is to be more competitive, and so that our allies naturally just want to buy from us, that it isn't a choice of cheap China or expensive Canada, but we're providing a comparable product at a comparable amount. And so better regulation, better policy, better export infrastructure, that all helps to bring the cost of the Canadian product down. But I will say, in terms of the defense supply chain, when we just say, critical minerals, it tells me that we're still not quite at the level of sophistication. When we start to have a product by product plan, what is our plan for gallium with NATO? What is our plan for graphite with NATO? What is our plan for indium with, and who's going to do it? Canada's not going to do all 12, of the NATO minerals, but are there 3 or 4 or 5 that Canada can take the lead on and say we can do the production and we can do this initial level of refining? And then who else in the alliance is already refining some of these products that could expand? And so it actually takes a lot of coordination, and that's obviously made more difficult by the fact that the United States has been a lot more of an adversarial partner to the rest of the alliance. And that's why I think working closely with Australia is fantastic. There's a lot Canada and Australia could cover on that list just between the two of us. But there's obviously some European countries also that just have excellent chemical and refining capacity, don't have the raw material, and that we need to work with them as you move up the value of the supply chain from that raw material into that final component that actually goes into a weapon system.
We've seen China increasingly describe itself as a near Arctic state and has shown a growing interest in Arctic resources and shipping routes. What does Canada need to do to ensure that our natural resources, our sovereignty, and our strategic interests in the Arctic remain secure?
So with China, the thing that I would worry most about in the Arctic is that they see it as an attack vector. It's an approach for them, and it's the most exposed flank. And so the primary thing we need to do is have presence and have monitoring and interception capabilities, be able to deter them even thinking about entering North America through the Arctic. And so I'm not that worried about them stealing resources. Sean can tell you how hard it is to build a mine in the Arctic. China can't just come in under the radar and start extracting copper or something like that. But also we want to make sure there's enough private sector free market money that people aren't reliant on Chinese funding to get these Arctic projects off the ground.
Ms. LaPointe. So I do we have some extra time. I'd like to ask two questions, if I may, and then I'm going to pass it back to my members for them to ask final questions around. Mr. Balzilli, you do have around a number of research vessels in the Arctic. And I just came back, a few of us came back from Washington, and all the talk down there is ensuring that Canada protects its sovereignty and does its part in the Arctic Circle, and ensuring the Americans certainly want to see Canada step up and initiate the necessary steps to protect our sovereignty, ultimately the Western Hemisphere. In your research work that you do with those vessels, do you share intel with our Navy and with Canada?
Yes, thank you for the question. I've endowed and supported the Arctic Research Foundation, which I created and provided several tens of millions of dollars over the years, and continue to do it personally. And we have about a dozen terrestrial science stations as well as several research vessels, and so we do absolutely. We've had naval people on our vessels. We crew it. We in the Arctic. The one thing I've learned is there's no separation between the economy, the environment, communities, and security. There's no hermetic separation. So we're doing a lot of work in Grays Bay for the road up there. We're doing a lot of the science work for extending Churchill. So we're in the Kitikmeot Sea. We're in Yellowknife and all of the advanced Great Slave Lake for power there, and much else. We cooperate extensively. It's a missing piece in the ecosystem. Delighted to do it, and it's a real opportunity to step up its game where you coordinate these pieces, because if you're sensing for environment, you're also sensing for the economy generally, and you're also sensing for security.
Thank you for that. And Mr. Boyd, I think you referenced in your opening remarks the lack of deep water seaports up in the north for some of our fleets, and you do have extensive work up in the north with Indigenous and with existing sites. And I'm just wondering about repurposing some of those facilities, and because of your private sector engagement, you're also improving our infrastructure in the region and air bases, possibly as alternatives. Can you share with us what you are suggesting or have done or doing in this very realm in regards to the infrastructure spend in the far north?
Yeah, so part of the, that's a good question. Part of the offer that's on the table to the Department of National Defense is when the Meadowbank mine closes, there's a 800-person camp, there's a large airstrip, there's a total contained facility, and we've said to the Department of National Defense, at some point you should look at this as something ready-made, already built. You could downsize it, you could upsize it, you could do what you want, but you should look at it. They've asked us to send them the plans. The other thing that we put on the table as we move forward with Hope Bay on the Northwest Passage on the northern coast, is there an opportunity to maybe use our logistical capacity and help the Canadian military build some sort of installation around the Hope Bay facility, whether it's training, whatever it could be, but we've also put that on the table because it's all about logistics planning, barge season, and we know we can do it a lot quicker, and we can do it at a much lower cost than if the military was to do something like that on their own. So those are part of the discussions to help use our logistical capacity, our experience, our relationships in communities to get dots on the map quicker in the far north.
Well, we'll have a few more minutes. Mr. Bazan, do you want to lead off with another round of questions, or Ms. Gallant? And then I'll come to the other two, if I can. I'll try to fit everybody in if we can.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you to Mr. Basili. What measurable milestones and accountability mechanisms would you propose to ensure investments in critical minerals actually translate to sovereign IP and military readiness?
Thank you for the question. This is a technical realm, and one of the expressions I use in the tangible economy, if you get 90% right, you get 90% of the benefits. In the intangible economy, if you get 90% right, you get 10% of the benefits. It's very easy to leak out. So the answer that other nations have done for decades is they create institutions that oversee that. For instance, in Germany, they have the Fraunhofer Institute, 30,000 employees, 80 research centers, one centralized manager of all IP. You need to have it very strategic, very structural. The same for your data, because data has economies of scale and scope. It's the only way to do this is some kind of crown corporation, because would you trust a private corporation with your health data? And you have to govern it, so it's got to be democratically accountable. Canada was built on institutions, and then when it's right, we privatize them. But we've got to put that thinking cap back on in this changed world for institutions for IP, institutions for data, and more strategic participation in the rules in the globe. And again, we're spending all the money. We're just not getting the outcomes. And you need a central locus of expertise that starts to implement this. All of those things have been absent for decades when the rest of the world has cranked up their expertise in them.
Given agentic AI and foreign-controlled digital infrastructure are amplifying our risk to command and control systems, and they are also processing our own critical minerals that power these technologies, what urgent steps should the Department of National Defense and CSE take to partner and procure from Canadian innovators instead of foreign providers?
Thank you very much for the question. And sure, these agentic systems are very threatening because they can be very clever in cyber breaches, so that's a place to up our game. But we've got a pretty good cyber expertise in Canada. I think that's a longer suit. I think the more important thing you have to understand is that when it comes to AI, it's a thin line between strip mined and participating in this factor of productivity. And the most important thing is you can't separate the inference application, the data, and the compute. They all blend as one now. And if that's not under sovereign democratic control, like our military, police force, hospitals, water treatment plants, then it tends to go to strip mining. And so it's an institutional approach for AI data. It's an and you can allow companies to use it just like you allow companies to use our Quebec Hydro. No problem, but it's a utility. And our pensions are a utility. So that's the kind of thing we need to do. And then you put systemic rules so that it doesn't leak out. But right now, our farms are run by John Deere and International Harvester. Our payments and tokenization is run abroad. All our AI systems are run abroad. So we're very vulnerable to leverage.
So how far off is the world from the next disruptive communication innovation, and which resources, assets should Canada prepare to have ready upon its arrival?
I think we're getting it at all fronts right now. I think one of the things that I probably alerted you to that surprised you was the amount of tokenization that's going on. And then you get Jared Kushner and Wyckoff, whose son started World Liberty, meeting with Putin and the head of the sovereign fund on rare minerals. Well, the Trumps just tokenized real estate 2 weeks ago in the Middle East. They're going to be tokenizing rare minerals. Do we control our own chain, is what is called a sovereign chain in tokenization? And farms are going to get tokenized. It's the new rails. It's an opportunity. So I would say tokenization is big. I would say leverage of infrastructure in AI and cloud for who gets the control in the money is big. I'm very excited for Canada because I'm an entrepreneur, so I'm always optimistic. We have a little bit of reorientation, a little bit of expertise. You will see very dramatic differences in a very short period of time. This is all fixable. Mine is an optimistic message. If we didn't have a solution, I don't think I'd come and testify because it'd just be saddening. And so we have all the ability to reorient here. And this, I think, that's why I said you're at this nexus, put the economy into it and really push this stuff.
Thank you as well, Silly. Time is coming to an end. Mr. Watchor and Mr. Savatamble, one question each.
Sure. Yeah, I'd like to talk just a little bit, maybe with Mr. Boyd, about refining and processing. Everybody's saying we got to stop just extracting minerals and sending them somewhere else for processing. How do we create an environment here in Canada that we want, or that companies can process? Is it something we can do on a short term or a medium term?
No, it's gonna take some time. I think the quick wins are potentially looking at older operations that already have permits in place and have tailings facilities that can be reopened. So those are the quick wins. And it's not just gold. It's we can see the federal government's investment in the Thompson area in Manitoba for nickel. You look at Gas Bay copper as well. That's a potential to reopen. So I think you've got to start there. But processing is really around the economics. And we built this country based on processing facilities being next to big base metal mines. So you got to find the mines, you got to find the big deposits, and then you got to be willing in this environment to put in processing facilities. And I can tell you that the environmental standards and ability to build these things in a more environmentally friendly way are far superior than they were 4 or 5 decades ago.
Oui, c'est une question qui est large, mais évidemment, comme on a...
I have a broad question, but since we can't answer, not everyone can answer, the first one to raise their hand can answer. Since we will be renegotiating CUSMA, should we focus this discussion around CUSMA, or should we try not to lay all this down on paper, since we are within a chaotic relationship with the U.S.? What are your thoughts?
Ben, peu importe ce que vous allez inclure dans...
No matter what you want to include in the future agreement with the U.S., you want to make sure that there are measures to make sure that any action related to critical minerals or other elements would be done by respecting Indigenous rights, by making sure we respect everything that Canada wants for its image and to make a real difference for national defense, for economy, and also for the environment. And this needs to be the case for any agreement with foreign governments.
The U.S. by law has 26 advisory committees for the last 50 years with 700 experts that inserts these structures into it. Canada has nothing. If you search USTR advisory committees, the first sentence will literally restate what I have. If you search Canada International Trade Advisory Committees, there's nothing. So if you want to advance your norms, whatever they may be, you're going to have to create an infusion structure that puts them into the words. But I've read USMCA. It's 1 million words. It was written by the U.S. over many years, and they dropped it on us. And we have to start to be front-footed because this is another set of legal frameworks. I didn't spend much time on that. I spent on other legal frameworks, but it absolutely structures environment, sovereign control of IP, sovereign control of standards, sovereign control of data. And we're going to have to start to push back on these realms if we want to advance the prosperity, sovereignty, and security of Canada.
Folks, thank you very much. Certainly the comments most recently made and in our discussions in our trip to Washington, a lot of think tanks, a lot of academics, a lot of others are reinforcing that Canada has the potential and the ability, frankly, to move it forward in a more positive way, as we do. So with that, folks, if there's nothing more, with all of your concurrence, this meeting is adjourned.